Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's webinar, which is Supporting Vision Zero using road traffic data and analytics, part of ConnectMe's asset mapping events, harnessing location intelligence series. I'd like to welcome you all. I'm Stuti Srivastava. I'm a group product manager, safety and AI, leading our data services at TomTom, and I'll be your moderator for the event today. I'll also be hosting the Q&A later in the presentation. Now, before we get started, we'd like to run a quick poll with our audience today. We'd love to find out where you're from, what industries and sectors you work in. The poll's popped up right about now on your screen, so feel free to fill it in and hit submit. Now, today's session is going to be a very interactive one, so please enter your questions into the Q&A chat. You have it at the bottom navigation of your screen. There's no need to raise your hand. Just post all the questions, and by the end of the presentations, the panelists are going to respond to your questions in a very engaging and informative panel discussion. Throughout the presentations, you may have polls pop up on your screen, so please participate in the polls today. It'll help us guide the webinar in a more enriched and informed way to represent everybody's questions. Now, for information about the speakers and the event agenda, you can click the Resources tab at the bottom of your screen. We've also shared some useful links from across the industry and from our speakers in the same section. You can always click to access these anytime throughout the webinar. Please note that the session will be recorded and it will be available for download and on demand after the event. You will receive an email notifying you when the recording is available. A big thank you to our webinar series sponsor, TomTom, for making this educational opportunity available to us. Today's a big lineup of featured speakers. So besides myself, we're joined by Erik Fretland, who's the Senior Data Scientist at Michelin Mobility Intelligence. We have Richard Owen, who's the CEO of Agilysis Limited. We have Steve Abley, Chief Executive also at Abley. Sean Johnson, who's the Vice President of Sales at Replica. And last but not the least, we have Saurav Miglani, who's a Senior Management of Segment Marketing for Public Sector at TomTom. Without further ado, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We know that crash reports are a lagging indicator. To achieve Vision Zero, agencies need fresher risk signals. Think of speeding, think of incidents, think of changing conditions throughout the global transportation network, and transparent reporting that allows us to achieve this goal in a more proactive way rather than reactive way. In today's session, you will learn about how traffic and location intelligence can support the planning, response, and recovery across all types of disruptions. I'm going to briefly talk about the things we want to go over today. How real-time safety data sets help identify high injury corridors, prioritize countermeasures, and build public trust and compliance. How we use speed, congestion, and incident data to map these high-risk corridors, and the importance of data-driven approaches in achieving Vision Zero together. Hopefully, by the end of this session, we will educate you on how to pinpoint these high-risk corridors before the crashes occur, methods to measure the effectiveness of different safety interventions, the strategies to manage and best monitor speeds in safety-sensitive zones, and building a proactive data-informed foundation for Vision Zero initiatives. Before we get started with the first presenter, let's take a look at the results from the poll. There's a very large representation from local governments, about 64%. That's good to hear. And about 98% of our participants are based out of the United States of America. So that's a good sign. I also see that the transportation sector is heavily represented, including land public administration. And wow, most of the municipalities today have a size of over 100,000. That's about 46%. Very nice. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker today. Please welcome Saurav Miglani from TomTom.
Thank you, Stuti. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Saurav Miglani. I'm part of the segment marketing lead here at TomTom, and I represent public sector for North America, Europe, and APAC. Let me start by sharing my screen. All right. So Stuti has already given us a good introduction of what we will hear today in the next 60 to 90 minutes. I'll use the next few minutes to set the stage for how data-driven approaches can be used to understand risk, target interventions, measure outcomes, and move towards proactive risk management. So I'll sort of set the stage, and then we'll have all of our partners and colleagues who will take us through some of the examples and use cases that are being offered in the market using their solutions. So to start with, how does the challenge look like for us in the US, right? If we look at the US road fatalities, there was a peak in 2021 where it reached 43,000. But we see that the last 14 quarters, there has been a decline every quarter in terms of number of fatalities, which shows a pretty positive sign. It means that all of the funding, investments, and decisions that have been taken to improve safety for road users, it is paying off. But I think still the gap between where we want to be versus where we are, it's still pretty significant. I've also added another data point here, which is fatality rate per 100 miles of vehicle miles traveled. I wanted to add this to sort of understand how does this number compare to Europe, because there is this perception that people in the US drive much more than Europe. So obviously we'll have much more number of road fatalities than in the US. But then I wanted to set a, let's say, same stage comparing number of miles traveled. And if we compare that to Europe, I think in the US, this number is still between 2 to 3x more as we compare different European countries. So, the Nordic countries, which is Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the number there is about 0.25. And then as we take the average of Western and Central Europe, that number of road fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, that is about 0.5. So as you see, it's not just about that people drive more here in the US, but still the roads are less safer for the users here in the US. And what are the primary causes for these accidents? Speeding accounts for almost 30% of all fatalities. The second biggest factor is alcohol impairment. The third one is distracted driving, which we all can blame ourselves. I'm sure everybody does that. Another significant factor is that 50% of the passenger vehicle occupants, they do not wear seat belts. I think this is a shame in today's world. And then we have the vulnerable road users, where what we see is even though occupant deaths have decreased, but fatalities among pedestrians and cyclists, it has grown significantly over the last few years. So this sets the stage of what the challenge is for us. And what I've done is I've looked at some of the, let's say, most common safety strategies that are delivering measurable impact across different geographies, different cities across the world. And I've taken a few examples to show what is being done and what has been the impact. So when we start with one of the biggest factors, which was speed and speed management, what we see is that at 40 miles per hour, the survival rate is 2 in 10. And then as you reduce the speed limits to 30 miles per hour, the survival rate improves to 6 in 10. And at 20 miles per hour, it is 2 in 10. So as you see, speed is one of the major factors. And it's also probably something that can be you know, easily taken care of as compared to some of the other strategies. Even though it is one of the most divisive initiatives, you know, you get a lot of pushback from the local residents, from politicians, from almost everyone. But I think this is one of the easiest ways to bring fatalities down. We see the example from Portland, where speed limit reduction to 20 miles per hour on residential streets and 25 miles per hour on arterials. It saw a decrease of 43% in deaths as compared to 2023. So you can see, you know, just the reduction of speed limits decreasing the deaths by almost 43% in a span of 1 year. Similarly, in Amsterdam, where I come from, so I'm based out of Amsterdam, the Amsterdam city sort of implemented a 30 kilometer per hour, which is almost 19 miles per hour speed limit for the entire city. It resulted in quite a lot of benefits. The average speeds reduced by 5%, the crashes reduced by 11%, and this is all within 1 year. So, you know, we see very quick changes with speed management. The second strategy, which is also pretty easy in a way, which is the automated enforcement. We see a lot of cities doing this now, wherein you use the data to understand where people are actually speeding, where they are going over the speed limit or, you know, above the 85th percentile. And you use this data informed targeting to set up safety countermeasures or speed cameras and AI systems to reduce violations and promote safer driving behavior. And we have examples from San Francisco recently where the speeds reduced by 72%, where the speed cameras were added in 2025. And similarly in Chicago, it resulted in a reduction of crashes for pedestrians and bicycles by 46% near the location where the speed cameras were installed. So, you know, it's not just protecting the occupants of the vehicle, but also vulnerable road users. Then we have the difficult one, which is roadway redesign, which probably requires much more funding from the government. And this is where some of the cities have been, let's say, using data to understand which are the road segments where changes need to take place, right? So we've seen examples from Columbus where they transformed a 6-lane street to a 2-lane street with a protected bike lane in each direction, upgraded traffic signals, street lights, and this resulted in 50% reduction in crashes and 89% reduction in excessive speeding. And, you know, when we were on the first slide, we also looked at how many fatalities there are in the US per 100 million vehicle miles traveled versus Europe. I think one of the key reasons why we have lesser fatalities in Europe is because of the roadway design. There is a lot of priority being given to vulnerable road users in the cities as compared to majority of the cities here in the US. And I mean, another simple thing that Milwaukee had done was they added speed bumps and raised crosswalks. And just this small factor resulted in crashes being reduced by 14%. And then lastly, when you combine all of this with a more data-driven targeting, which combines not just crash history, but connected vehicle data like speeds, harsh braking, electronic stability control activations, weather data, hazard warnings, and all of the data that is available to identify risk hotspots. And you can proactively use that to reduce severe crashes. So I have another 2 examples there from California, where they identified that 83% of all injuries and fatal crashes, they occurred only on 8% of the streets. So, you know, using that data-driven approach, it is much easier to then look at where exactly the problems are, proactively make changes to ensure that you can, let's say, install sidewalk extensions or whatever the issues there are based on that corridor to reduce the injury and fatal crashes on that particular HIN. Similarly, we've seen that in Atlanta, they found out that 2,000 plus crashes occurred on just 2 streets, and this is all using the data, right? And so they are now adding protected bike lanes, safer pedestrian crossings. We've also seen that when this sort of data is presented, they're also able to get funding to make changes to the road network or roadway redesign. So this was understanding where we are in terms of road safety, what are some of the targeted strategies that are being used to deliver measurable impact. I'll now briefly speak about TomTom and what we do, right? So we are the location and navigation experts that have a global map, traffic and live services, which is real-time traffic data, hazard warnings, traffic flow, archive of historical data. We make maps for automation. We have EV services and a navigation SDK. So we support all the, from automotive customers to enterprises like Ubers, the Bolts, and to public sector authorities. So this is the span of what we do. And because of this, we have huge amount of data that we then archive as part of our traffic measures and support a lot of different use cases within public sector, from operations and management, planning optimization to safety related use cases. And I'll quickly run through a new product that we are working on, which is dedicated for road safety. And this will incorporate a lot of the data that we have from the past few years, which is not available today as part of our product portfolio. So speeds we already have as part of our traffic stats, but we are also adding historical incidents and accidents. So as part of our real-time traffic data, we deliver jams, road closures, accidents, congestion, delays in real time. And now we want to use this archive data into one product, and that becomes suitable for road safety analytics and use cases. We will also combine acceleration and deceleration rates as part of the same product, including behavioral changes around lanes, understanding slippery roads, weather archive data, and we also have a lot of data on mobile mapping and data that we collect from vehicles, which is where exactly the road signs are. And this can be used to understand missing signage to better identify road safety hazards. So this was briefly what I wanted to cover today. I'll now hand it over to Erik from Michelin Mobility, who will take us through how they are solving road safety related challenges. Over to you, Erik.
Awesome. Thank you, Saurav. I will start sharing my screen here. Perfect. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Erik Fretland. I'm a senior data scientist with Michelin Mobility. MMI uses, specifically our Safer Roads department, uses crashed notification, but hopefully that you guys can still see me and hear me. I'll check the
Yes, Erik,
chat.
we can see you and hear you and your slides.
Perfect. Awesome. That is great to hear. Sorry about that. But anyways, like I was saying, what I'll be focusing on today is talking about how MMI, our Safer Roads department, uses telematics data to identify, locate, quantify, measure risk in the real world, and then partners with safety organizations to take action to mitigate those risks. And of course, fitting in with the theme here, the main goal for MMI Safer Roads is working towards Vision Zero, that vision of the future, 0 fatal crashes on our roadways, 0 severe injury crashes on our roadways, and working together to achieve that. So I'll briefly go into some detail on the approach that MMI takes to do this. One of our biggest data sources is telematics data. So data coming from cell phones, specifically that of drivers in their cars who've opted into this data set, opted into this anonymous data collection, and then that data set is then used to evaluate driving behavior on the roads looking at where risk is prevalent, where risky behavior is prevalent. Now, obviously, many of you or most of you are very familiar with telematics data, but I'll just talk a little bit about how MMI thinks about and uses and where we find value in this telematics data. The biggest thing that we focus on, even more so than just generally understanding speeds or generally understanding kind of the general pulse of behavior across a road network, is looking at the events that happen on the edge, looking at the abnormal behavioral events. And whether that's things like harsh braking, harsh acceleration, even looking at harsh swerving, because these we've found to be the best proxies for near misses and of course crashes themselves, where for an intersection you may have one crash, maybe you have 100 or 1,000 harsh braking events, which may stand out as abnormal and thus is likely to be an indicator of future crashes happening there. And of course, all these data points, in addition to understanding the intensity at which these events happen, we also have them geolocated and time-stamped. So we're able to understand things like the speed at which these drivers were going, the weather conditions, the lighting conditions when these events happen, understanding how those things play a role, the direction in which drivers were going. And obviously, with all of these factors, we have a pretty good sense of the overall conditions and factors that may have contributed and may have played a role at a local level, that one event, but of course, big picture, understanding some broader patterns. And all of these factors go into some of the capabilities that, the analytics capabilities that MMI has. Skipping to the next slide here. Of course, telematics data enables a lot of different kinds of insights, a lot of different kinds of analytics. So I'll just touch on some broad categories of those here. The first of them being looking at, the first of these approaches kind of looking at the behavior itself. So looking at individual dangerous near miss events, harsh braking events, swervings, accelerations, looking at those in localized areas, taking a snapshot, looking at an intersection and understanding how many harsh braking events come from one direction versus another, at what time of day, how do they cross with different accelerations, regular accelerations coming from different directions, things like that, to really get an understanding of the behavioral profile in an area. The middle box that I have here is kind of taking the behavior data and taking that one step further. So applying a predictive analytics framework to this, looking at things like these abnormal near misses where they're happening frequently and regularly, looking at the built environment in a specific area and understanding, relating this to crash data, severe crashes that have happened in the past, to understand then the likelihood in the future when we see certain behavior with certain conditions of the roadway infrastructure, the built environment, how does that equate to a likelihood of severe crashes happening in the future? And then the third box that I have here is sort of the validation and optimization category, where you're looking at decisions, you as a safety organization, you're looking at decisions you may have made in the past, whether it's to do a targeted enforcement program with law enforcement or automated speed enforcement or infrastructure change like changing an intersection to a roundabout, actually looking at the behavior that's happening there to understand, was this, looking at it before, looking at it after, to understand, hey, what was the measurable impact of this decision? And should I make this kind of decision? Is this a good approach in other situations in the future, in other similar roadway situations? So the first of the examples that I'll talk about, I'll talk through two today. One of these is a partnership that MMI did with the Napa Valley Transportation Authority last year. Napa Valley, of course, representing Napa County in California. And this was a really good project to talk about because there was a wide variety of analyses that we did. One of these was a sort of a general overall risk map. So looking at all of the behavior on all of the different roads in Napa County, ranging from the largest to the smallest, highways down to county roads, and building out a risk map and a behavior map, identifying where abnormally risky behavior was happening. But another cool aspect of this analysis was the fact that it came from multiple different time periods. So NVTA was interested in understanding the trend or the evolution of risk over time. So we pulled data from 2023 and we pulled data from the same time period in 2024 to get an understanding of how behavior patterns had changed in that time, so that they could understand how specific programs that they had enacted, whether they were effective or not, things like that. And in addition to these full road network level insights and level analyses, we also did some deep dives looking at answering a couple of the highest priority questions that NVTA had, one of which was around tourism in specific areas and how, of course, Napa Valley is known as a winery, a popular winery destination, just a popular tourist destination in general. So looking at how these factors may contribute to risk in certain areas, and then also a deep dive into all of the different school zones throughout the county, ranging from high schools to elementary schools, public and private, looking to evaluate holistically which of those needed more safety attention. And I'll just briefly call out a couple things on the right of the screen. The bigger picture there is the outputs of a risk prediction model that MMI has built, and I'll go into more detail on that on the next slide. But then the picture on the bottom of the screen, the bottom right of the screen, is a zoomed in look at just some examples of what these individual events look like, understanding where they're happening, what direction they're coming from, and things of that nature with the granularity that I mentioned a couple slides ago. So here, what we're looking at is a video of the outputs of MMI's graph risk prediction model, which is essentially evaluating characteristics like behavior, built infrastructure, et cetera, and assigning a risk score between 1 and 0 to each road segment throughout the county in terms of how likely a VRU-related severe crash is to happen there, where darker red is higher likelihood and lighter blue is lower likelihood. And the outputs of this model, this risk prediction model, combined with the actual behavioral data points, allowed us to localize for every specific school which streets around that school were high risk, what may have been driving that risk, and come up with a holistic risk score for each of the schools in the county, which then allowed NVTA to have a better sense for which ones they should be focusing on in order to improve student safety. The second of the examples that I'll talk about is a partnership that MMI had with a couple of agencies in the state of Washington. One of these was the Washington Traffic Safety Commission, and the other of these was the Washington State Patrol, their police department. And overall, this was a slightly different type of project with a slightly different set of goals. It was more focused on the resource optimization and targeting specific areas for a targeted enforcement program. Basically, with Washington State Police operating in a resource-constrained environment, the task for MMI was to scan, this time not every single road, but specifically looking at the interstate and state highway system throughout the entire state of Washington, scanning these roads, identifying where speeding was happening most frequently, and most severely identifying where risky driving behaviors in general were happening most frequently, and then partnering with these agencies to identify specific areas for this targeted enforcement program to take place, where it would have the biggest impact, and then at the end of the program, measuring what impact it actually had. And so what that ended up looking like was, we found 4 different corridors across the state, 3 different corridors in the west side of the state, and then 1 to the east through Spokane, where the WSP would carry out this targeted enforcement program, would work to ramp up the level of enforcement in those areas. And then after 6 weeks of this happening, MMI then evaluated how effective, essentially what the results were. And the results were strong. It was some very interesting findings. We were able to quantify the relationship between increasing the number of officers in an area and the effect that that had on the overall speed and the frequency of dangerous driving behaviors, things like that. Also able to localize, to identify which corridors the intervention was most effective, where it was less effective. And data from the WSP, the Washington State Patrol, indicated that this targeted enforcement program in these high-risk areas that MMI helped identify resulted in some very strong outcomes in terms of comparison of that same period last year in 2024 to that period in 2025 during the enforcement program. 58% reduction in severe collisions, which was again, major step on the road to Vision Zero. And those are the examples that I had to talk through. I am very much looking forward to the Q&A at the end, but in the meantime, I will turn it over to Richard Owens with Agilysis, and I'll turn it over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Erik. Okay, I'd like to talk to you today about some examples of how we've used connected vehicle data and specifically TomTom data in projects in the UK, but also overseas as well. So yeah, as I mentioned, my name is Richard Owen, the CEO of Agilysis. We've carried out projects on road safety in various different countries, none in the USA yet, but I'm hoping that after today's webinar, maybe that will change. And we've been very successful in our achievements, receiving a number of awards, both in the UK and globally. If you want to get an idea of the number of clients that we work with, there's a lot of UK-based road authorities in there, but we've also worked with the World Bank, World Health Organization, Asian Development Bank, a number of large insurers, etc. So a mixture of public and private sector. So I'm going to talk to you briefly today about 3 different projects that we've been involved in. And hopefully there's a narrative thread here through the 3 of them that shows you how you can use this, connected vehicle data in different ways. So this first project that we did is one that we did for the Asian Development Bank. So this is a project where we were asked to assess safety performance on roads across the whole of Thailand. Now, using traditional data sources, putting out automated traffic counters would cost millions and millions of dollars. So what we decided to do is to leverage the power of the data that TomTom had to have a look at how we could understand what speeding behavior looked like across thousands of kilometers worth of roads. So I'm going to press play on this video in a moment, and it's going to show you some things. This is a dashboard that we produced online that now the Asian Development Bank have published and made available to the Thai government. It has a number of indicators on the left-hand side. You're going to see them moving pretty quickly. I'm just going to introduce what they are. So the top left-hand corner, we've got the speed, then we've got the road length, we've got the number of vehicle movements in the sample. That's 7.7 billion that we've got within there, the average speed and the 85th percentile speed. And we could have pulled out a heck of a lot more information out of the data if we wanted to. So let me just skip forward a little bit here, and you can see that what I've done is I've put in a land use filter here. So I'm able to just select the urban roads that we had on there. And that's because we use the Overture base map. So many of you may be aware of the Overture base map. It's a project that TomTom have been involved in. And this gives us a really good global network that's enhanced by the power of that data from TomTom to work in many different countries around the world. So if I just press play on this now, you can see that I can then select rural roads in there as well. And the indicators are updating at the same time so that we can see what the level of speed compliance is on the network, how people's behavior is adjusting according to the speed limit that they're in. So because we know speed limit data from the information that we got from TomTom, of course, in the mapping, we can start filter by different speed limits. And then also according to the road classes. So if we just want to have a look at the primary road network, we can do that, or maybe some of the more secondary roads. And this is the power of, combining this powerful mapping data along with the connected vehicle data that's available in there too. Now, for Thailand, we're able to then drill down into individual provinces. So if we look at the city of Bangkok, you can see the information that we've got available there and the indicators updating at the same time. But because we based this on data for individual roads, I can actually then go and click and just have a look at an individual road section. So, you can see how this data that we're providing gives you an idea of what safety performance looks like across an entire region or even a country. Or you can have a look at the information within a smaller section, but then you can even drill down to those individual roads. So yeah, we used a whole year's worth of data in this. And the costs, as I said, they were absolutely minuscule compared to using, those legacy systems, those really expensive to maintain traffic counters, but you get, a much more timely result and, much greater coverage than you would do with some of those older technologies. So yeah, that's the project that we did for the Asian Development Bank. Now I'm going to move on to, hopefully, if the slides move along, to another project where we use TomTom data a little closer to home. So many of you may be aware, Saurav mentioned it earlier, there's a big push in lots of places around the world to lower speed limits. And Wales, which is a country within the United Kingdom, decided that they were going to go with a blanket approach. They were going to change all of the speed limits from 30 miles per hour down to 20 miles per hour. Still working in miles per hour. That's one thing that we do have in common, definitely. We don't use kilometers per hour when we're talking about the UK. So they spent a long time putting in place the legislation, planning on what was going to happen. And we were just sat there watching and thinking, hey, I wonder what is going to happen on day one. When they switch this over, are motorists actually going to pay any attention to this? And it was the time when we just started working with TomTom data. So we reached out to them and said, hey, look, we've got this really great idea. We'd love to find out what happens in the week after the speed limits change across, tens of thousands of miles of roads within Wales. So yeah, I ordered the data, the weekend that the change happened, and then the weekend after the change happened, I went in and ordered the data again. Set up my queries automatically, just cloned those reports. Took me about an hour to reorder the data, made myself a nice cup of tea, and then waited for the results to come in. And yeah, you can see the kind of sample data on here, and I'm pretty sure most of you have seen TomTom data, and you can sign up to a demo on the website. Yeah, so we used that data, downloaded all of that, processed that, and we did not know what was going to happen. We had no idea. Are people going to pay attention? All they did was change some signs, but the results that we saw were astonishing, really. So the grey line is showing the distribution of vehicle speeds across individual road links, 500 miles worth of roads in Wales we used in this data. So the grey was the previous distribution, and the orange line is showing post-implementation. This is just 5 days afterwards. And we saw that we had speeds dropping from around 23 miles per hour down to 19.8 miles per hour averaged across all of those links. But what you can also see is you've got a narrowing of that speed profile. And for a lot of people that work in road safety, that's what we want to see. Drivers tending to stick together, follow similar speeds, get rid of those really high risk, high speed drivers, that would normally be expected to be going way above the speed limit. So, just showing how, with access to this vehicle data, you can, rapidly assess what's happening on your road networks almost the day after you've made those changes. And that's something that our customers find, really important. The final example that I'm going to show you relates to enforcement as well. And I know this is something that happens in the US a lot. In the UK, I think it's fair to say that we're a pioneer in speed enforcement. And the really popular technology at the moment is these average speed cameras. So, these point-to-point, time over distance, they all have different names. So they're normally columns that look a little bit like this one here. And it's an ANPR camera. It takes the speed at the start, it takes the speed at the end. It uses some simple maths to work out the time taken for people to go across there. And then if you're too high above the speed limit, then you get a letter in the post from your local police force. So a lot of these schemes have been introduced, but we were finding that people were often waiting maybe years to actually do the evaluation. They were waiting for that, lag data in terms of collisions. Whereas we thought, we can go and have a look and see what happened immediately after the implementation. So you can see there's a long straight road here. This is the A5, not too far from where I live, in Silverstone in the UK, built by the Romans, nice and straight, but also encourages high speeds as well. So this is the sample report from TomTom comparing speeds. So at either end, not a huge change in the speed because it's at the end of those speed cameras, but within the middle, the green sections, you can start to see the drops in the speeds. So I've just got a sample of the results at the bottom there, which are really, really impressive again. I mean, for start, you can see the sample sizes within the analysis in there, hundreds of thousands of vehicles in the sample, which gives you great confidence. And we've got that drop in the median speeds from 51.1 miles per hour down to about 46 miles per hour. That's really impressive, a 5 mile per hour drop in speeds with much greater levels of compliance. And also that 85th percentile speed, that's come down an enormous amount. We used to have an 85th percentile at 57, and now it's down to 48. So, giving the planners, the people that, put their money where their mouth is in terms of funding these schemes, they can immediately see the kinds of impacts that they had. So, okay, right, that's me done. I am now going to hand over to Steve Abley from Abley, who's going to talk through some of his experience as well.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks to TomTom for inviting me and the other panelists to share our views and ways that we can better approach and achieve Vision Zero. I'm Steve Abley, and I'm proud to be able to share a little bit about the Abley Safe System and how these proactive, systemic, and safe system approach tools we've developed help you on the journey towards Vision Zero. We started this journey because our international clients told us they wanted much better road safety insights in rural areas. And although those areas are known as being generally poor for road safety, there's also a distinct lack of data pinpointing risky locations. It's particularly prevalent beyond only measuring traffic flow or exposure metrics. That's where the Abley Safe System comes in. Unlike crash-led tools, the Safe System identifies risk everywhere, not just where crashes have already happened. And the insights Safe System provides could be star ratings at a strategic level via safe roads, or tactical interventions for rural curves or intersections via safe curves and safe intersections.
Steve.
Yeah.
Steve, you're not sharing your screen? Were you planning to share your screen?
Yep, very soon.
Okay.
So regardless of the specific focus area, each of the Abley Safe System products aligns with the Highway Safety Manual for Best Practice and identifies network risk. So every road, curve, or intersection that deserves attention. That means even if it's never had a recorded crash, you can prioritize that risk. So limited budgets go where they reduce the most risk. And probably most importantly of all, you can provide guidance for how to mitigate that risk using real-world countermeasures so crews can act immediately, consistently, and defensively. Now, in terms of timeliness, rather than walking through each of the Safe System products in detail, I want to show how agencies actually use the Abley Safe System to make decisions earlier, more consistently, and at scale. And to do that, I'm going to demo safe curves and delve straight into a couple of use cases. I'll just turn into presenter mode. And that should be up on screen now.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first use case is directed to finding risk where crashes haven't happened yet at a strategic level. This is safe curves showing the analysis for the whole of the US, broken down into the component identify, prioritize, and intervention parts. I'm using the US here to purely show scale, The same analysis applies to any jurisdiction, and we'll dive into a smaller area soon. This is the analysis we've undertaken for the whole of the US, and although you can't see it, it extends from Alaska to Hawaii to Puerto Rico. The analysis includes all roads, and we've identified every single horizontal curve, and for that curve we've identified the specific risk of a rural roadway departure crash and what the 100% compliant MUTCD signage, delineation and striping is for that curve, as well as a few other things too, such as pavement friction areas, including aggressive and comfortable deceleration lengths, that again are specific to the exact curve. And if that wasn't comprehensive enough, for good measure, we've also provided stopping sight distance. Okay, now I'm going to take you through some of the insights for a much smaller jurisdiction. This is the intersection of Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia that includes Hamilton, Marion, Jackson, and Dade counties. I've just clicked the Identify tab and the various curve risk classes show. I'll turn them on. And when I do that, the map populates with red, amber, green, and grey curves. These are all the curves for these counties for paved roads. This is great, but it's a smorgasbord of individual risk. And rather, I'd prefer to aggregate this individual risk into homogeneous driving corridors. And to do that, I select the prioritized layer, and as you can see here, the curves have been aggregated into those corridors. Importantly, from a safe system approach perspective, there is a need to focus on the worst corridors first, and we have identified priority 1 and priority 2 corridors that are only 25% of the network length, but hold about 70% of the network risk. I'll say that again. A quarter of any network can be shown to hold roughly 3/4 of the network risk. And obviously, these are the locations that you want to invest into first. Okay, this is the second use case where we turn the earlier policy actions into defensible on-the-ground action. Let's have a specific look at where investment could be deployed as potential countermeasures, such as signs, markings, surfacing and barriers, speed actions, and improved visibility. So let's have a look at one of the worst corridors, and that's here. Okay, I've zoomed in, and the corridor we're interested in is shown in black. The attributes panel pops out on the right, and this tells us this is the 20th worst corridor in the study area, as well as some basic facts, including the speed limit and functional classification. Now, I've just expanded the countermeasures panel, and this tells us what are foundational actions we can take at a corridor level to improve road safety. That includes installing all the required MUTCD signage, relocating any signage that isn't in alignment with the latest MUTCD edition, and replacing any signage that doesn't now comply with MUTCD. There are, though, some other actions that could be taken, including enhancement and supplementary actions. These are the enhancement actions that include further delineation items, and it also expands into pavement maintenance. And the supplementary actions include further delineation and maintenance items that are bespoke to the specific priority. These are only the actions that are relevant to the priority 1 corridors. All the actions also hyperlink to the FHWA proven countermeasures web pages to provide additional practitioner guidance. Now, let's go and have a look at some of these potential interventions. I've turned on the signs and markings layer. I know that some agencies struggle with inconsistency, discretion, and legacy decisions, but Safe Curves fixes those issues because it converts standards such as MUTCD into exact locations, exact treatments, and exact justifications. And you can see those here. This shows the 100% MUTCD compliant horizontal warning sign locations, type, and speed advisory plaques, as well as the 100% compliant no passing line locations. I'm going to zoom in a little closer to this area. So I've zoomed in now and I've clicked the horizontal warning sign to the south. The attributes panel tells me the details about the sign and why it's justified. In this instance, it's because the sign is optional and the speed differential to the speed limit is 5 miles per hour. There's no need for ball banking. Safe Curves does the heavy lifting for that too. I could go on, for example, showing the difference between the newest MUTCD standard and earlier standards, but I'll leave that for another day. Basically, Safe System helps agencies act earlier, act consistently, and act with confidence before people are seriously hurt. And that's how Abley Safe System supports Vision Zero in practice, not just in principle. Anyway, that's enough from me. This is my email address, and if you're looking for more in-depth demo, just shoot me a note. Now I'd like to introduce and hand over to Sean from Replica.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to TomTom for the opportunity to present here today and for facilitating this important conversation on how we can be using telematics data and driver behavior data on everybody's kind of mission and vision for Vision Zero. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. So I'm going to spend my time today speaking specifically about how we can be more proactive instead of reactive as it relates to our Vision Zero efforts. And I wanted to just start by, showing you this screen. And everybody, I think, on the call today has spent some amount of time reviewing crash records. And we know the challenges, I think, that come with those crash records. The lagging time it takes to from event to actually receiving the record, the incompleteness or the need to kind of normalize and cleanse this information. It's not the fault of the record itself or the department that's filing the report or the agency that's consuming the report. It's just the reality of the situation. But I think the good news is with telematics data, specifically driver behavior data, there's now the ability to in more real time understand what type of risk is occurring on the transportation network at large. And agencies now more than ever before are starting to harness this data and apply it to their work. So a few specific examples that I wanted to share with y'all today. This is a screen grab from our Safety Insights application. And in this instance, we had been working with a metropolitan planning organization who had in their LRTP identified some corridors of regional significance. And within the Safety Insights application, what they quickly were able to do from just like a desktop research or analysis perspective was to visualize all of the crashes that had occurred on these corridors of regional significance. In this instance, specifically filtering for crashes that had the primary contributing factor of unsafe speeds. And with our driver behavior data, we were able to do an overlay of excessive speeding where the speeding was 10 to 20 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. So I know in the intro, we talked a little bit, or you heard a little bit about survivability. And what we've seen many of our municipal customers and NPO customers start to do is focus on excessive speeding on suburban arterials, where there's a high presence of vulnerable road users. And so this is just kind of one configuration or one filtering that we've done for today's conversation, but within the application, not only do you have the ability to look at specific types of risky driver behavior, excessive speeding, harsh braking, rapid acceleration, phone handling, but with our travel pattern and travel behavior data, you can actually start to normalize some of those things. So you may ask the question, well, how do I prioritize corridor A versus corridor B if they both have 500 instances of excessive speeding. The volume data helps to normalize that to then prioritize those projects. And then furthermore, I think the other question that we hear people asking is, are the crashes correlated to the risky driving or not? And so on the screen, you're seeing the yellow dots. Those are the crashes. And then you're seeing kind of that deep or dark purple color. That's where the majority of excessive speeding is occurring on this network specifically. Our customers are using this for existing conditions, right? Where are the problem locations on their network from the perspective of historical crash data and from the perspective of risky driving behavior on that network. So again, going from the reactive, waiting for the crash data to come in, to the proactive, which is more focused on risky driving, and then employing a variety of countermeasures from enforcement to built projects to marketing and policy. So once you have existing conditions, once you've prioritized projects, once you've worked with local enforcement on new initiatives, how do you measure the efficacy of those interventions? This is a screen grab from our before and after analysis application. The example I grabbed today is in Washington, D.C. that focuses on a bus priority corridor. And along this corridor, there was a dedicated lane for the bus and added protected bicycle lanes, as well as reconfigured stops along this corridor. So the short of this is you're able to go in post intervention and measure the efficacy of those projects. Did we see a decrease in dangerous driving? Did we see a increase or decrease in speeds, right? Because I think we hear a lot, well, if we have the bike lane, we're going to increase travel times along the corridor. Within a very short period of time post built project, you can actually go into our before and after analysis application to understand the impacts of those interventions and did they drive the outcomes that you desired with those projects. And then finally, this is more kind of, I'll call it bleeding edge, something that we have in kind of our Skunk Works division that's working on more real-time driver behavior data. This is an example where we saw, and we can do this within hours and not days on kind of the risky driver behavior. We saw what was appeared to be a suspected collision. This is in Sacramento. You see in the right-hand sidebar the details of that event. So we saw a massive decrease in speeds within this device specifically. And what we're efforting to do within this application is actually bring together additional, I'll call them adjacent data sets to provide context as to the why. Why did this event occur specifically? So you see road feature characteristics, including things like volumes. You see some information as it relates to land use and population densities, as well as things like weather conditions. So was this suspected collision or was this rapid deceleration caused by weather events or not? Within this application, you can also click in and see Google Street View, so you can actually see the built environment in the configuration of the roadway itself. So practitioners can then take that information and act upon it in more near real time. Again, this is one of the kind of latest and greatest applications that we have launched, but we're really excited to continue to bring in more of that contextually rich information and adjacent data sets to tell a more robust story on how agencies can act in more real time when they see outlier events or anomalies within the risky driver behavior data set. The last thing I'll say on this application specifically is one of the components that we're working on currently is the ability to build on top of the existing conditions data, some type of parameters or bounds that would then trigger notifications to the stakeholders. So if we saw the free flow speeds, or if we saw the typical excessive driving or excessive speeding behavior on a corridor was, let's say, 10 events per day, and all of a sudden now we see 20 events per day, there's an automatic trigger that sends a notification to the stakeholders so then they can kick off partnership with their enforcement partners to deploy troops to that location to help offset that increase that we're seeing within the data set. So there's a whole bunch of really exciting things that I think is possible with this new and emerging data set. I think as an industry, we're at the tip of the iceberg. And so I want to just thank everybody again for the time. And I would also like to welcome back my co-presenters for the Q&A portion of today's presentation.
Hello again. Looks like the whole group is back together. Well, thank you, everybody. We'd like to thank everyone again. Your presentations, the insights, they've been wonderful. And I'm sure the audience can agree that they're going to leave this webinar more informed than when they joined it. So let's move on to our Q&A. Reminder to the audience, you can still post your questions in the Q&A. It's at the bottom of your navigation pane. I'm going to start off with the first question from Retired Obuch. I hope I'm not butchering your name. Maybe this one's for Erik. So Erik, the success of machine learning models relies on the quantity of data it uses. The larger the data set, we all know, the better and more precise the quality of predicted events. Can you give us an example of the quantity or the volume of data sets that you work with?
Sure, absolutely. Thinking recently to a project from Minnesota, just if we're talking about data volumes. So if you recall to my presentation, I talked about the importance of those abnormal events. So, kind of those outliers, those riskiest, most aggressive near misses. For 2 counties in Minnesota with a combined population of about 70,000 people, over a span of 3 months, we're talking about 165,000 near miss events. Now, these are pretty rural counties, like I said, combined 70,000 people. So that obviously scales up significantly in larger urban areas, but that does show there's coverage, from this data source, from this data set in rural areas as well. Obviously, we factor in sample sizes, and there are some places, some roads so rural, those estimates, we won't make those estimates, but in the vast majority of even low traffic roads, this data, telematics data in general, can be used to make some estimates. And it's also important to keep in mind a comprehensive machine learning model, like the one I mentioned, but any comprehensive machine learning model is not only dependent on this driving behavior data, it's looking at that as one factor. So other things like the built environment, the road infrastructure, et cetera, those also are important predictive signals for the likelihood of crash.
Thank you. That's very well informed. And it sounds like just a small example, right? A couple of cities and corridors that you're talking about. But if we extrapolate on a global scale, I'm sure it's vast amounts of data that we deal with on a minutely basis, right? If not daily. Thanks,
right, absolutely.
Erik. My next question is for Steve. So let's talk a little bit more about it. We heard from Erik about the data overview. But where do you see the biggest gap today, Steve? Is it data? Is it the technology? Is it funding or something else?
Okay, thanks, Stuti. Look, it certainly isn't the desire, because people really want to make a meaningful difference in road safety. And it certainly isn't like this problem that we have around road safety. It's not a North American problem. It's an international world problem. And so everyone has an immense desire to solve this problem. And so that certainly, you will go in the direction where you want to solve. So the good news is that we actually have a lot of impetus to actually get things done. And generally in North America, funding isn't, it's constrained for sure, but it's not the biggest constraint that I see. I see that when I travel around North America, in fact, a lot more of it is around human capability and human resource. And a lot of that is to do with a retiring age force, and being able to do more with less is increasingly important. And that means less human interaction. So leaning into these data products is going to be, well, I would say it's the way of the future, but in fact, it's actually the way of the now. So everything that we've talked about today is actually here and it's available. So although we know these resource constraints exist and they're only going to get worse, we do actually know that a lot of the stuff that we've talked about is going to fill the void, and that's particularly important because in North America particularly, there is increasing uncertainty about capital funding. So that's really, really important. The other thing that I see is that specifically what we're talking about isn't only about road safety, it's about the safe system implementation. And there is a difference. And so where we've been previously very good at, for example, SPFs and other associated micro analysis, we really need to start to get a little bit more strategic around network-wide assessments, because that's where a safe system directs us to put our energy. So, we have the tools in the toolbox. We just need to reach for them.
Judy, could I chime in there
Thank you,
too?
Steve. Yes, please, Sean, go for it.
Yeah, I think the other thing I see a lot of is, I'll call it the inertia of the status quo, especially as it relates to some of these new and emerging tools. It's just like, hey, we've done it this way. We've always done it this way. Why would we do it a different way? And I think that's real. I know that the people who have likely joined us on the call today are not in that category because they're here and they've self-selected to be here. But I think they face some real institutional headwinds to do something different. And I find that a lot within agencies where I will, I'll get engaged with somebody who sees the value and the possibility of tools like these, but they then get mowed down by leadership team as they're advocating for it. So I don't want to discount that reality that many of our public agency partners are faced with internally, and some of the politics that they're faced with internally. I think that's a real challenge that they have.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. Traditionalists do not do well in this area.
Yeah, I see emojis flying around, so it sounds like the audience agrees with you. And I believe both of you are referring to a very similar bottleneck in this space, right? Which is the inertia of change, right? And behavior change as a very big individual behavior change as a propagator of essentially broadcasting this change globally. So thank you. Really, really interesting. I learned something new today. Continuing on this, I think, Richard, we've talked about as you've also had a very good presentation. Myself and the audience included would love to know what's the shortest time frame where you can credibly show impact from an intervention perspective, or do you have any examples for us today?
Yeah, I think it depends on the intervention. We've got people are using this for non-safety purposes as well. They're looking at transport planners. They're looking at the impacts of closing roads. We had one of our clients who gave a great example where they're a local authority and the National Road Authority made some changes to their road network. And then immediately, because they were doing some roadworks, they ended up with all of this national, through traffic going through, small local villages. And they could see it happening on the roads with their eyes. So what they did is they logged on, they printed, they got the report done in TomTom. And then they immediately that day sent it off and said, right, you guys are going to need to give us some money, because we're going to need to put in some diversion signs. We're going to need to get people moving in a different direction, telling them not to follow their sat navs for the diversions. So yeah, it's really there and available immediately for all sorts of use cases. That example that I gave in Wales, it's one of those great research projects where you go into it and you just don't know what the answer is going to be, and then you get the answer, and the immediate change in driver behavior is fantastic. And I think that gives the decision makers, gives the politicians great comfort that they made that right decision. And if they're the ones who are holding the purse strings, then I think it means that they're the ones that can be investing in immediate evaluation rather than just waiting 1 or 2 years further down the line.
Wow, that's wonderful. I mean, how often have we heard about something taking years? And it kind of ties back to what Steve was talking about as well, right? That there's always this resistance to act or react now rather than like futures or decades from now, right? So that's quite brilliant. Thank you. I'm gonna look at some of the answers. I see Q&A is buzzing now. There's a question from Travis Goodrich. And they're asking, from a city or country standpoint, are there costs associated with using these tools? Or are there free options available to begin analyzing local traffic data? They'd like to share this with the transportation department and start exploring our data using these resources. Well done, Travis. You're the first person who's going to start using these tools. So who'd like to take this one?
Yeah, I can start with that. So as TomTom, we have a lot of data and tools that you can use for understanding quite a lot of things when it comes to traffic measures. And we have something that we offer as part of our evaluation. So, it might not be free, otherwise, yeah, we won't be in the business, but we do provide tools and resources for everyone to try out all these different tools, understand the power that the data can bring to the table, and then maybe use that as justification to get the funds that you need to do further holistic analysis. So that's from the TomTom end. I'm not sure if there's anybody else to chime in here.
Yeah, if I could, yeah, we do the same. So there's the opportunity to trial safe curves, safe intersections, safe roads data in the US. Just flick us a note, and that would be the way to kick that off.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I believe this answers Weston's question about who's conducting comparable analysis of similar curves or intersections where accidents do not occur. Weston, I believe Steve's already talked to you. Find him on LinkedIn, go connect with him, send him an email, right? And he'd be happy to explore more or suggest more. I can also talk to you about TomTom because I'm a group product manager within TomTom, and we also enable, or we have, how do I phrase it correctly? We have continuous R&D with vast volumes of global data, where our bread and butter is to really carry out and validate different hypotheses based on different conditions, right? From traffic to congestion situations to weather-related phenomena happening. Feel free to connect. I'm sure you'll be surprised how many people are actively doing this. Okay, I have one last question for Saurav. Saurav, I know we talk about this a lot at work. And I know it's become a bit of a buzzword, but where do you see AI genuinely helping safety teams in the next 12 months? Do you have any examples from TomTom you can talk about?
Yeah, thanks, Stuti. Indeed, AI is the buzzword. I think everybody is using it now. It makes our life simpler and easier. And I think this is what we see when it comes to all these different tools that are available for us right now. I don't have to start with traffic management. Let's say you want to create a presentation, just ask the AI agent, give the inputs that this is what I want. And this is what we see happening in the industry in traffic management as well. So, there are a lot of these agents that probably every company is working on. And eventually I see a multi-agent architecture where all of these different specialized agents will connect to each other to answer questions that agencies might have. For example, we will have an agent that will answer, tell me what changed when we introduced a specific, let's say, change in speed limit. How do the speeds change? So instead of doing that analysis in the back end, trying to understand what does that really mean, the AI agent will present within, let's say, a minute what the actual output looks like. So you don't need to be an expert in understanding how to work around with the data, create those reports manually. And eventually, let's say there's another partner provider who's delivering some solution on top of it. They might have an AI agent that answers much more than what does data look like, but more about what can now actually be done. So, these multiple agents speak to themselves, each other, and then provide an answer that somebody's asking for. So, you don't need to be an expert. And then in terms of safety, you move from reactive to proactive. You can introduce as many variables as you want, and the agent just might do the analysis for you and then tell you what the problem areas are.
Absolutely, Saurav. That does not sound scary at all. Maybe Erik or Sean, you'd like to chime in and quote some examples from your
Yeah.
domains.
Yeah, I'd love to, and I'll be brief, Erik, so you can as well. I think there's two things that I'd like to share. I think generally our view into how we intend to leverage AI to benefit our customers is twofold. One, we have already started to allow natural language querying on top of these massive data sets. So users no longer have to climb the learning curve of what buttons do I click to get the answer to my question and to extract the data. So I think we serve a universe of users, from people who can write SQL queries into multi-million row data tables to people like me who are not data scientists, right? And so we're trying to service the multitude, and we believe that that natural language querying will allow people to do that. Ask the question, where are the most dangerous corridors within my city? Where is the most amount of bicycle trips occurring on the network within my jurisdiction? How are people accessing the bus stop or the train, right? And be returned with answers to those questions. And then maybe zooming out from there, I think it's really using AI to decrease the amount of time spent wrangling the data, to free up more time to do what I believe to be the most high value use of time, which is like, what are we going to do about it? Now we know where the problems are. Now we know where the challenges are. Now let's talk and debate about the countermeasures that we can employ to fix the problem.
Very cool, Sean. Thank you for sharing that. If I may chime in, I've experienced that whole journey when you start with a product idea and you want to play around with it, right? So that first proof of concept where you have the most critical hypothesis used to take like months for us to even get there, right? Before we could start building. And now I notice like 3 days. In 3 days, you are enabled with all the insights you need to start making decisions. So thank you. Very, very well put. Erik, would you like to add to that?
For sure. Thanks, Stuti. Yeah, essentially in that exact same vein, one of the areas we see the most potential for benefit is because MMI has done a lot of specialized analyses, answering some of the highest priority questions for our different partners that may not have been done before, may not have even been asked before. So, like you guys both touched on, accelerating the timeline between okay, hey, here's the question, how do we go about solving it, to building new models, to building new frameworks for analyses, ingesting new kinds of data, speeding up the processes that our team of data scientists and data engineers carries out. So just getting those answers quicker, maintaining robustness, maintaining quality, but moving to get the answers where they need to be, to who they need to be quicker.
All right, cool. Thank you. I want to be mindful of the time, so I'm sure there's one question that everybody is burning to answer. I'd like to start off with Richard. What's the one message, Richard, that you'd like the audience today to leave with?
Well, the thing that I find that people most need to hear is that the data's there, that it's possible, and that people are doing it already. This is nothing new. It's exciting, but people are using it on a day-to-day basis. I think the thing that we find is when you show people the tools, you show people the examples, you order data for their road and give them a result within minutes, they're like, wow, I wish I'd known about this earlier. So everybody on this webinar is extremely lucky today.
Wow, thanks, Richard. Let's ask the same question to Steve. Steve, how about you?
Look, I think I've got the same as Richard's message, really. The answer is now. You just have to ask.
Very cool. If you're running for office, I'm voting for you. That was really short and sweet. Saurav, what's your message for the audience today?
No, I think Richard probably answered it for most of us. The data is there. It's pretty easy to understand. It's pretty to understand what's where the problem areas are, what needs to be done, and instead of reacting, you move towards more proactiveness. I think that is what I would love to say. And yeah, there's just abundance of data, and now with AI agents coming in, you don't need to be an expert to understand all of the data, run these reports. Maybe in a few months, you just ask the agent what you actually want to understand. Like, show me the corridors with the most number of crashes and what I need to do to prevent those. It would list down all of those things for you.
Thank you, Saurav. Sean, how about yourself?
I'm going to keep pulling the thread that I mentioned earlier, which is the inertia, the status quo. Like I said, I think the people who joined today are here because they believe in the power of data sets and tools like these. So I would just message to everybody who joined is basically, you can do it. You can overcome that inertia. And any of us on the call today are happy to work with you to kick off a pilot, to start to build a business case internally. So that's kind of my plug, is like, don't be afraid of that. Don't let it stop you from moving forward. Engage and continue the conversation following today, because like I said, I think anyone here is happy to come alongside you to build that business case internally and test some of our products.
Thank you, Sean. You're saying you're safe with us. Use us. Get started. Erik, we're going to end this with you. What's your message to the audience today?
Oh, man. Well, in addition to everything, the other points that everyone else has made, just thinking about the wealth of data that's out there, the behavioral data and all the other kinds of data. We would just want to make sure that we're not, I don't want to say stuck in the past, but using crashes and lower frequency events to try to predict the future is very tough to do. So thinking through that forward-looking framework, using predictive modeling, the kinds of things that can really quantify and measure and identify risk before it even happens. Just using the data that's out there is a huge tool to get better and better safety outcomes than what we've been able to see in the past. So that's all very important.
Thank you, Erik. And with that said, I'd like to thank everybody once again for joining today, spending an hour and a half of your valuable time. As we said earlier, the recordings will be available on demand. Please reach out to the organizers for it. The people who are in here, you can look them up on LinkedIn or their preferred form of communication, and have a wonderful, safe day and evening and the weeks. And do not be scared. We're all in this together. Silos are not going to build and achieve what we're going for. It has to be a joint effort where each of us takes that first step, and takes that first leap. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.